everyone. I thought I'd make this short video, just a little bit of a landmark bike and thing going on here with Asbo number 50, which when I first thought of the name and even started giving them numbers in the early days, they weren't actually the first of the Royal Enfield bullets that I'd done tuning work to. And sort of prior to my thinking of the name, there's probably a good 10 or maybe a dozen or so bikes out there going around before I thought of the Asbo name, but here we are up to number 50, and out of all that count I haven't had all of the bikes here. Quite a few have just been engines that have been brought here or sent here for me to rebuild and tune, but I have had quite a number of complete bikes as well, and they encompass the 350 and 500 bullets like you see here, Indian or British, and there's also been a couple of the what some people call the AVL 500s or the Electra X. Done a few of those, and I've even done a few 535 Continental GT machines as well, and they all go into the Asbo count. And although the sort of basic principles of what I do to them are the same, the closest you'll get of any two being anywhere near the same would be very similar. They're all different in some way or another. But I thought it'd be a nice opportunity to talk about the Asbo bikes, and this one in particular, being number 50, is special in several ways. I mean, it's a lovely, beautifully presented bike. I sometimes get a bit nervous about having such nice condition bikes to work on, because it's so easy to sort of maybe make a mistake and put a scratch or a dent. It doesn't bear thinking about really, but I'm always as careful as I can be. And here it is, all done and ready to go home. We've had the rides on it. And this one has had the full Monty, as you might call it. The engine's been taken out and totally stripped. It's had the crank split, the flywheels have been lightened and rebalanced. The crank assembly is about it would have been 10.5 kilograms originally. I've taken about a kilogram off that. It's around about 9.5 kilograms now. It's got a steel conrod fitted to it, this one, and the roller big end, which some people prefer over the aluminium conrod, and certainly going to take a lot more effort or thrashing to break the steel conrod, which you probably never would do, as opposed to the alloy conrods, which can and sometimes do break. So that's peace of mind. It's not actually going to make the bike perform any better, but it'll improve its chances of staying in one piece if you do use the performance. So we got all that in there. New main bearings, European nice upgrade main bearings in there. It's got the high capacity oil pumps, which were already in it when it came here. Alloy cylinder barrel, that's replaced the cast iron one, and I've also shortened it. In this case, this one I took 1.6 millimeters off the height. The Indian cylinder barrels seem to be taller by 1.5 to 2 millimeters than their old Redditch equivalents, so that's brought back to Redditch specifications, which incidentally, when I started shortening the cylinder barrels by those sort of amounts, I wasn't aware that the Redditch cylinder barrels were shorter than the Indian ones. It was just something that I thought of off the top of my head, as at top dead centre, the sort of edges, the radius edges of the piston domes never seem to come right up to the top of the liner. So I sort of decided that I'd like them to come to the top, and I've inadvertently gone back to the Redditch specs of cylinder barrel heights. So we've got alloy barrel there. It's bored out to 40 thou oversize, or 1 millimeter oversize, to accept an American made high compression piston, which they come in various oversizes but not standard size. I usually choose the plus 40 because it's 1 millimeter, and we get 512cc bored out to plus 40, and we've got the 9:1 so-called American piston in there, which really does give 9:1 with the shortened cylinder barrel. 40 the cylinder head. You've got nice big open free flowing ports through there. The owner's already fitted this much less restrictive and rather nice sounding exhaust, and the Amel carburettor, which that had a 200 main jet in it and a 106 needle jet, and the needle was on its highest or richest setting already when it came here. Well, I've kept the needle in that position, but I've gone up to a 107 needle jet and a 240 main jet, just to make sure that when you open the throttle you've got a good load of fuel going through that we now need, with the extra breathing and the higher compression and so on. The inlet cams, well, the camshafts, inlet and exhaust, are both the standard factory cams in this engine, but I've retarded the inlet cam by 1 tooth, which is 18 degrees at the crankshaft, which sounds way too much, but it works, as we've seen. This bike goes very, very well indeed, and I'm very happy with it, and I hope the owner will be too. But going back to the Asbo story, I have mentioned it in an older video about myself quite a while ago now. People still ask, where did the name come from? Well, it actually started with the bike that became, by default, number 2. I'd already tuned the bike for a paying customer, but I hadn't thought of the name, and that was a 500. That one went to Scotland, and that later on retrospectively became number 1. My bike that actually started the name, set the ball rolling, was then called number 2, and it's been stamped as number 2, and that still lives locally. But when I had it, I was in Llandudno one day in the town buying something from the ironmongers. I think I was parked outside in the street, and the bike was quite noisy. It had a high level and quite noisy sort of scrambles type exhaust pipe on it, and an engine spec very similar to this, minus the expensive conrod and bearings and so on, but it was in a very similar state of tune. And I started it up, and there was people about in the street milling about, doing whatever, going about their business. When I started the bike, quite a few people turned and looked, obviously the noise of the bike, but one person actually jumped in the air and started shouting and swearing, and I didn't mean to upset anybody, but it was actually quite funny, I think, as well. It made me go home, and I was commenting about the bike on a forum that I go on, Midland Bullet Riders, and I had a blog running about the bike as I'd been tuning it, and I actually made the comment that if ever any bike deserved an Asbo, this was it. Now, the Asbos have been dropped in Britain now, but they were antisocial behaviour orders, and they were given to naughty boys and girls that weren't quite naughty enough to go to prison, sort of like a slap on the wrist and next time you might go to jail. So the whole thing sort of summed up the slightly antisocial bad behaviour of these bullets compared to their sort of factory standard counterparts, which are much more sort of mundane and humble, if you like. So that's where the name came from, the Asbo bullet. Now, the guy who got number 1, the first bike that I tuned for a customer, and just before I thought of the name, he called his bike Father of Asbo. And I remember I must have got up to maybe approaching 10 of the Asbo bikes. There weren't many about then. And he got in touch one day, and I don't mind this at all, but he just asked me, he said, all these bikes that you're tuning, he said, there's going to be more and more of them by the sound of it. He said, and I've got number 1. He said, do you think that if anything happened to you, if you should die, do you think my bike will become more valuable? Well, I mean, some people could have probably got quite upset by that, but I had to have a laugh, and he meant it humorously. I sort of thought about it, well, maybe he's got a point. I don't want to sort of test the theory, but anyway, here we are with number 50, and so far, touch wood, I'm still here, and hopefully the count is still running. So that's a little bit about the Asbo bikes, and in particular this landmark one, number 50. So I just thought I'd make this clip just to sort of celebrate that a little bit, because I never really thought it would ever come to this when I thought of the name, and then started numbering them when there was a handful of them. But here we are with 50. I wouldn't say done, because 49 is waiting for its cylinder head. There was a hold up with that one, so 50 has leapfrogged 49 actually. But they're still going, and there's still more in the pipeline, so who knows, maybe one day we might even be looking at number 100.